Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. This is Donald Philip Beach from Jacksonville, North Carolina. Let us open using the Collect for Trinity Sunday 2020. Almighty and ever-living God, was given to your servants grace by and through the confession of a true faith to acknowledge the glory of the eternal Trinity and in power of divine majesty to worship the unity. We beseech thee that thou would keep us steadfast in this Trinitarian faith, and evermore defend us from all adversities, who livest and reignest, one God, world without end. Amen. Well, we continue to march along behind and with Professor Earle Cairns. We'll be taking notice of some areas of disagreement shortly. He's premillennial and dispensational, I think. Well, we'll see as we go. But nonetheless, we listen to him as we do other scholars and learn from wherever truth may be found, praying for discernment in all things and good judgment is one of the fruits of the faith, is wisdom and knowing how to live practically. Over here in practical theology, we insist on Old Testament, New Testament, church history, systematics, and practical theology in the package as a governing hermeneutic. Controlling hermeneutic that corrects other fields. Of course, we move out into science and mathematics and art and music, so forth. With this, that even helps us over here. That's why we don't listen to crazy contemporary Christian music. Why we don't watch trash movies. Aside from wasting time when Paul has told us to redeem the time. Well, let's see what the good prof has to offer here. He's talking about the impact of the Jewish church. They still further prepared the way for coming of Christianity by providing the infant church. There's, you see, where he's just dead wrong. He thinks that the infant church begins with the New Testament period. Dead wrong, Professor. The infant church began back in the Garden of Eden. We're going to correct him all the time on this. Can't let them get away with that, because then pretty soon the Old Testament is some kind of external thing that then will be projected out into a millennial period. Sorry, Prof. I'm sitting in his class at Wheaton. I got to say that. He keeps doing this. And then he uses the term ancient church for the Apostolic to 600 AD. No, 1,000 times no. Anyways, it provided the apostolic period with the Old Testament. We agree there. So let's move on. Even a casual study of the New Testament will reveal Christ's and the apostles' deep indebtedness to the Old Testament and their reverence for it as God's word to man. Many Gentiles also read it and became familiar with the tenets of the Jewish faith, or the Christian faith. Old Testament is a Christian document. This fact is indicated in accounts by numerous proselytes to Judaism or proselytes to Christianity. Many of these proselytes were able to move from Judaism to Christianity because of their exposure to the Old Testament, the sacred. Lost my spot. The sacred book of the newborn church. Let me just cross that out for the future. The Apostolic Church. Many religions, Mohammedanism, for example, look to their leader for their sacred book. But Christ left no sacred writings for the church. God help us. As part of the Trinity, he superintended the Old Testament. He superintended the New Testament. This is where you got to have your systematics functioning. When you do church history, you do the other disciplines, well, then students be turned out reflecting the weaknesses and the flaws of their teachers. The books of the Old Testament, the books of the New Testament, given under the inspiration of the Spirit, were to be living literature of the church. The Jews also, number 5, provided an institution that many Christians forget was the most useful in the rise and development of Christianity. That institution is the Jewish synagogues. Break. We agree. We've talked about that where New Testament studies. The role of the synagogue and the diaspora, expansion of scriptures. We talked about the translation of the Old Testament into Greek during the Ptolemaic period, post-Alexandrian period, to meet the need of Egyptian Jews to speak to Greeks. Born of necessity during the enforced absence of the Jews from the temple at Jerusalem during the Babylonian captivity, synagogue became integral part of Jewish life. And we calculated in another series, Jesus lived 33 years and perfectly kept the moral law and ceremonial ritual law. Every Sabbath he was in church or in the synagogue. 33 times 52 comes out to over 1,700 times he was in a synagogue. A little appreciated or emphasized fact of the life of Jesus and his active, passive, perpetual, personal obedience, the righteousness of which comes to us as believers, imputation of righteousness. Through the synagogue, the Jews and also many Gentiles were made familiar with the higher approach to life. It was also a place to which Paul first went to preach in all the cities he reached in the course of his missionary journeys. It became the preaching house of early Christianity. There's also some cogency in the argument that the system of government practiced was early church and the Apostolic Church owed a good deal to its Jewish antecedents in the synagogue, liturgical prayers, the reading of the books of the Bible, singing of psalms, an exposition on the Bible, some of the same elements we have today, prayers. The elders and deacons of the early church, Apostolic Church, are reminiscent of the similar officers in the Jewish synagogue. Judaism was indeed the pedagogus to lead men to Christ, Galatians 3:25. The matters that have been discussed so far show how favored Christianity was, both as to time and region, in the period of its emergence. In the period of its expansion out beyond Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Rome. It's not the emergence of the church, it's the expansion of the church. You can see right here the difference between a Reformed confessionalist and this non-confessional evangelical type, dispensational type, premillennialist. There's no minor difference because we preach the gospel from the Old Testament like we do the New Testament. We see the glory of the Redeemer, forgiving God in the Old Testament gloriously. Glorious messianic promises by which the elect of the Old Testament were saved. I'm afraid we've not been, as Reformed people, of me, more particularly I'm referring to myself, have not been as vigorous as ought to have been called these premillennialists to heal. They're in the broader evangelical church, but make some egregious mistakes here in the covenant of grace. You might want to study some of this for further insights with the North American Reformed Seminary, www.tnars.net. This place is full of outstanding books, free education from high school level through the doctoral level. You don't have to move. The books are free. The tuition's free. It was designed that way. The Mediterranean world also had one culture centering in Rome. Simplification. One common tongue made it possible to give the gospel to most of the people of the empire in a tongue common to them and to the preacher. Palestine, the birthplace of the new religion, at a strategic location in the world. Paul was right in emphasizing that Christianity was not something done in a corner, Acts 26:26, because Palestine was an important crossroads linking the continents of Asia, Africa with Europe by a land route. Many of the most important battles of ancient history were fought for possession of this strategic area, and that's a fact. In the period of its birth and during the first 3 centuries of existence, conditions were more favorable. We've got to correct that. Period of the birth of Christianity. See again? That's why he starts his book and there's no Old Testament. It's church history. This is not a minor critique that's being offered here. This is major. We love you, Professor, but you are captivated by premillennialism and we're not liberated. You need to be corrected. We respect your command of the literature and so many other facts, but we can see how your philosophy governs your presentation. Negatively, through the contribution of the Greek and Roman world, and positively through Judaism, the world was prepared for the fullness of times, Gal.4.4, which is the title of this segment, when God sent forth his Son, bringing redemption to a war-torn and sin-weary humanity. It is significant that all the religions practiced in the Roman Empire at the time of Christ's birth, only Judaism and Christianity have been successful in surviving the changing course of human history. Well, we're done with this chapter on the fullness of time, and he's been showing us the different influences of the Greek and the Roman world, and then the Old Testament church, which he calls the Old Testament, we call the ancient church. Then he gives us a bibliography, and we're people of the we're bibliophiles. He's got a set here by George Howe and Gustav Heirer, Greek literature and translation. Also Roman literature and translation. David Breed's A History of the Preparation of the World for Christianity. Emil Schuller's History of the Jewish People at the Time of Jesus Christ. I've got that over here. Jack Finnegan, also, in The Light from the Ancient Past, from Princeton University Press. James Breasted, in Ancient Times. Albert Trevor's History of Ancient Civilization. Hellenic History by George Botsford. And then, of course, he likes Kenneth S. La Tourette, A History of the Expansion of Christianity, the First 5 Centuries. Bibliography for Ancient Church History. History of the Christian Church by Philip Schaff, 8 volumes, maybe the best, perhaps. For details. And he's also got his preferences in the bibliographies, often the German Reformed man. The Spreading Flame by F.F. Bruce. Good church history to 590. The History of the Christian Church from the Earliest Times to AD 461 by Frederick Folkes Jackson. A useful volume. He's the man who commented that the fundamentalists had history. Oh no, that was Shirley Jackson Case. Got the wrong guy here. But he's connected, I think, with Case at University of Chicago. B.J. Kidd, A History of the Ancient Church to 461 A.D., Oxford. Full references. Liberal Roman Catholic Viewpoint by Louis Duchesne, Early Church History, 1909. A more recent set by Hans Leitzman, History of the Early Church. Another one, History of the Early Church to 590. And then a couple more here. Bypass. We now move into chapter 2, entitled Upon This Rock, and the rock is not Peter. The rock is Christ, the chief cornerstone. We're talking about the spread of Christianity in the empire to 100. So we're in the Apostolic period. As we move forward here, that's what we're talking about. Christ is the rock upon which the church is founded. Through him comes faith in God for salvation. God reveals the Son to whomsoever he will reveal the Son. And he does not do that to all. Let that be noted. Matthew believes that and presents that ad memoriam ad Christum, that memorial towards Christ. The revelatory activity of Jesus is to open the hearts of his elect as the rock of the church, which makes men view personality as sacred because God is the creator of both man's physical and spiritual being, and because he, Christ the rock, is the hope concerning the future. The historicity of Christ. The values of Christianity have, from their beginnings, from the subjective standpoint and temporal history. Boy, this would irritate those singing the hot jazz music of Lutheran Boatmanianism, the phrase we love and we received from Prof. James Ennis Packer, the hot Lutheran music of Boatmanianism. He didn't like the historical Jesus, and we got the Jesus seminar characters spitting on the Gospels. Can it be put more delicately, politely, perhaps? Should it be? Well, maybe not. Because these values are inextricably linked with the person, life, and death of Jesus, some consideration must be given to the evidence for the historical existence of Jesus. Many have denied the fact that Christ was manifested in history. He's got a footnote here to Shirley J. Case, Historicity of Jesus, 1928. I think she may have been a part of those attacking the historicity of the gospel. Maybe she's reading Boltman too, and his crazy theology of the New Testament. But Boltman probably wouldn't listen to Shirley Case Jackson at University of Chicago. Anything that was English speaking, he tells us, isn't worth reading because they don't do theology, the Englishmen. And he goes on to say how only schoolboys, those are his words, believe in classic Christianity. Well, Rudy Boltman his carcass lies in some cemetery in Marburg with a tiny plaque to Rudy. His word has gone away. Nobody will remember him. Although the movement he fostered goes on with all of its damaging effects of arguing against the risen Savior. It has to be put in those stark, bold terms so the people across the street can realize they see Rudolph Boltman go the other way. Even liberals, somebody was telling me they met a Methodist who was a Boltmanian, and I've met them in Episcopal Church, met them in the chaplaincy, met them in some services. Bishop Buddha, what a name, huh? Buddha, Budbhe, I think it is. He says you don't have to believe in the resurrection to be a Christian. Said that Easter Sunday at National Cathedral. It's fortunate there's going on with Prof. Cairns here that there's extra biblical historical evidence for Christ. He goes now in the direction of pagan testimony, that is, non-Christians. Tacitus, the dean of Roman historians, links the name and origins of Christians with Christus, who in the reign of Tiberius suffered death by the sentence of the procurator, Pontius Pilate. So Tacitus is aware of that, and that's in his Annales. 1544 is somewhere up in here. Pliny, who was a proprietor of Bithynian Pontus, that's in Asia Minor or Turkey, wrote to the Emperor Trajan about 112 for advice on how he should deal with the Christians. His epistle gives valuable extra-biblical information concerning Christ, and this is found in Pliny's epistles. He paid high tribute to the moral integrity of the Christians by writing of their unwillingness to commit theft or adultery, to falsify their word, to repudiate a trust given to them. They were just decent, law-abiding citizens, is the idea. He went on to say that they sing a song to Christ as to God. Another writer, Lucian, wrote a rather satirical satire on Christians and their faith. He wrote it about 170. This is 50, 60 years after Pliny. He described the Christ as the one who was crucified in Palestine because he began this new cult. He wrote that Christ had taught the Christians to believe that they were brothers and should observe his laws. He also ridiculed them for worshiping the crucified sophist. This is the passing at Peregrinus, 1:11 and 13. So even though he's out of the church, at least we get a glimpse of how the Christians were viewed. These testimonies are highly valuable historical evidence, coming as they did from cultured Romans who despised the Christians and were hostile to them. On the basis of these testimonies, apart from the Bible, which is also a historical word, one conclude that there is valid existence for the historical Jesus. Jewish testimony. Josephus, the wealthy Jew who tried to justify Judaism to the cultured Romans by his writings, also mentions Christ. He wrote of James, the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ. This is in Josephus's Antiquity of the Jews, book 20, or paragraph 20, I should say. And another passage which is often condemned as an interpolation by Christians, but which many still think is authentic. Josephus wrote of Jesus as a wise man condemned to the cross by Pilate. Even granting some interpolation by Christians, most scholars agree that the basic information just mentioned is most likely a part of the original text. Certainly, Josephus was not a friend of Christianity, and thus his mention of Jesus is even of more historic value. The character of Christ. The Bible does give some indications. Let me grab my pen here. I'm going to start doing that. As to Christ's personality and character, even a casual reading of the Gospels leaves a powerful impression of his originality. Let's see if we get some Trinitarian stuff here. Where Jewish and modern authorities quote others as authorities for various statements, Christ simply uttered the words, "I say." We also refer back to the Old Testament too, the "Thus saith the Lord's." As Jesus was in his ministry as an expositor of his book, his own book, the Old Testament. He's co-author with the Father and the Spirit. Over and over again, he's interpreting the Old Testament in new ways, of course, in some respects, like the Sermon on the Mount. That's even more law-driven than Moses in a certain sense. He goes right to the heart of the matter. Thou shalt not commit adultery. What about your hearts, boys, girls? Statements following the use of this phrase and like phrases in the Gospels indicate the creativity and originality of Christ's thought, which astonished the people of his day. Indeed, it did. He taught as one, having authority. Christ's sincerity also stands out in biblical records. He was the only human being who had nothing ever to hide. That's an excellent point. And so he could be completely himself. The Gospels also give an impression of balance in his character. Boldness of character is usually associated with Peter, love with John, and meekness with Andrew. No one facet of character is in excess in Christ. I think we can insert here, we've been doing a character studies, take a break here. In another set of studies on loyalty, Christ is the exemplar of loyalty within the Trinity and has known that from an eternity past, in eternal glory. He's loyal to the Father and the Spirit on earth in his estate of humiliation. He's loyal to his people. He's loyal to his elect. He's loyal to his sheep for whom he gives his life. Very loyal. So we want to do this parallel studies, which we're doing with another book on character virtue. Loyalty is one of them. He's loyal right to the point of the cross. He learned obedience through suffering, we read in Hebrews. And he expects, demands, and gives loyalty to his followers and exhorts them to be loyal to God, to Jesus' words and teachings. The fool builds his house on sand. The wise man lays a foundation, and when the winds and the storms come, that house stands. And so we're called to a loyalty. And I might add in that section at the end of the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus puts his words on a level of co-equal authority with the Old Testament. But the libos take note of that and choke like dogs on a bone. Well, we get Cairns here giving us his view of Christ's character. This balance, originally, and transparency can only be adequately explained by the historical account of the virgin birth. And he does take notice of J. Gresham Machen's scholarly piece, The Virgin Birth of Christ. He calls it the best conservative and scholarly work on the subject. We agree. But let's bring this stroll along with Prof. Cairns to an end. We'll return, God willing, tomorrow. Let us pause for prayer and worship. May all of the glory and praise be to you, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, now and forever, as it was in the past, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Till tomorrow, God willing, Godspeed.